at the Dodger game last night and was not impressed, but it's still very early. Oh. Still. There we go. All right, so I'm gonna zoom in a second, and
Mary will go turn off that.
we're gonna get going.
Yeah, go turn off the computer.
Marcia, do you have anything to say this morning?
Not so much. I was just looking. I can't even see who's there. Morning, everybody. Hi, Francine. Hi, Mike and Mary. Hi, Rosemary.
Howdy.
Who else is there? Sandy. It's good to see everybody. How are you guys all doing?
We're good. We're in Sedona.
There you go. Now
Can you see me?
well, now they can look.
Okay. But they can't hear me.
I can hear you.
You can hear them.
Hi, Marcia.
Oh, you will in a second.
Hi, Marcia.
Yeah, right now,
Oh, there you go. There I am.
sound
Nice
is
to see everybody.
pretty good, but
I take a morning walk.
There you go.
I take a morning, hi. I take a morning walk, and when I do that, I mute my camera and I mute because that's when you guys start hearing bird sounds and cars going. Yeah. So then I turn it back on.
Hey, Mike, how are you feeling? I haven't seen you in a long time.
Good. We're doing good.
Good. Hey, Mary, we miss you. Hey, Francine. Rosemary, it's great to see your face. How's everything, Rosemary?
We're hanging in there,
Good.
Really.
Still visiting those beautiful sons and grandbabies?
Oh,
Baby, right?
yeah, she's almost 2.
Oh my God, I don't know where the time goes. I went to Yosemite about 3 weeks ago, and from there we went to Reno to visit my sister's grandson, and he's 2 as well. I have no grandkids, so for me to play with him all day was like the best gift anybody could give me. Fantastic. Fantastic. Enjoy all those grandbabies. It's good to see all you guys.
We went to the park and we met at the park, and when I went to go home back to my place up there, she goes, Nana!
Nice.
You know, that's all you could wish for, right? That's all you could wish for. As they grow up, they see you in that light. That's blessing. It's wonderful. No, I just have lots of dogs in our family. The grand dogs.
Yeah,
That's good. It's
I
all
had
good.
grand snakes for a while, so you do better than me.
This is how it all rolls. It's all good. Sunday, I got together with my kids, which you also can't wait to at least have some time with your kids. And we went to Santa Barbara for the day. So Todd and Leah, Alex and Philip, Tim and I, and my sister and her husband. I mean, that's like little miracles now, right?
absolutely.
Spend a day together. So it was delightful. Okay, I'm gonna go get my book ready. It's great to see all of you guys.
And right now we have to figure out how to get your sound. Right now the sound's coming through my computer, which we can't do. So we're going to hello. We're going to share up on the screen.
My phone just went off screen. That's okay. You on anything? True, huh? I know, but it's just nice to be able to go back to the same old time. I'm like, wow, we're almost living a very normal life now. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, it does. But it's
What's
different.
up with you guys?
Well, Sunday we spent the whole day with my boys, which was fabulous for my birthday.
Oh, cool.
And we went to Santa Barbara for the day. So that was really nice.
Oh, that's right. You guys said that.
Yeah, yesterday, Cheryl came and met us, yeah. And then, the end of April, we're gonna head to San Diego.
Oh.
Are you talking, Rabbi? We can't
Yeah,
hear you.
Rosemary, can you talk so we can hear you?
I can talk. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I gotta figure out how.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, you guys can hear, but we need to hear you a little bit better in here too. So let me, just give me 1 second. We still have people coming in live, so just give us a second.
At least they're not dead.
No, they're alive. These people are 100% alive.
So would you come? We go to.
We used to go to the Y, and we used to go to the Y, and I used to do this.
I'm a member there, my husband's a member there. Well, we do.
Great.
Well,
You in heaven is study Torah, so maybe they're here.
nothing, but we haven't
But
yet.
I decided I haven't gone, so I'm gonna quit. So I walked, and then we have a little gym in our place.
Oh, wait, don't you have, is it free?
It's $25.
Okay, because we have it for free.
Uh-huh.
Our insurance.
Sure,
But
I got her insurance. Yeah, don't talk to me about it.
but you know what, we,
I did. But if I'd known who it was, I would have been better.
But we go Mondays and Fridays.
All right,
Good, glad to hear it.
so we're gonna figure out how to get the sound so we can hear you properly. 'Cause we're not hearing you enough.
I said, do you need help? And then I said, Don's right here.
I mean,
Volunteer, yeah.
how many years did you do solar?
Oh my God, years.
She knows you so well. You know,
I used to, when she.
We can't hear the sound from them.
Okay.
I hear it, we hear it through the computer, but we're not gonna hear it through, if Michael can hear it, we can't hear it through the speakers. So we can hear you, you can hear us, but we can't hear you loud. So we're gonna have to figure out how to do that. So I don't know, hopefully Michael will come over and fix it while we're doing this.
So Rosemary, scream.
You don't have to scream, but I'm just trying to think if there's any way to get speakers. Oh, you know what?
Rabbi, you get those portable speakers in that room. You could probably use
I
them
know.
on your computer.
You know, I thought about that. There is a way to do that. So,
Sure there is.
yeah, I'm going to grab those. And Rosemary, what's down? Rosemary?
Echo going on.
Okay, yeah. The main thing right now is sure we can get you to sound nice and loud. Okay.
Can you hear us
You
now?
ready, Rosemary?
I'm ready, if you are.
Okay. We got you. We're starting, guys.
You're echoing.
I know.
It goes 1 mile an hour.
There, my camera. No, I'm okay.
okay there, right?
What?
If I sit over there.
Yeah. All right, folks. Well, we've got a little bit of a sound problem this morning. We're trying to figure out, but everybody can hear us out there. And Rosemary is going to read for us where she is, and hopefully we'll hear everybody good. But we were off last week. I was actually in Mexico, which is why I still am sunburned. But I have no, it was really not funny, but because I did put on a lot of sunscreen, but obviously not enough. And but I will tell you that we missed being for this, and you're having a problem hearing me? Okay. Well, that means that our sound is still a little screwy, but you'll hear them through those speakers. So last week we didn't have class, so you didn't miss anything if you weren't here. If you thought you were missing a class, you weren't, because we didn't have one. But we did the week before read about Saul and David, set up for what is the last chapter and the first chapter of the sections of Samuel. The original book of Samuel, the way we had it in the Bible, did not have a break between the first and second. There was no first and second book. There was just a book of Samuel. And when the break was put in there, the natural break was the death of Saul. But the way the book reads, it really shouldn't break there. So the fact that we're reading the end of one book and the beginning of another book actually works really well, because if we took a break between these two stories or two parts of the same story, we might forget a little bit about what happened. Just to refresh your memory of what we just read a couple weeks ago, Saul is in a campaign against the Philistines. He doesn't know it, or actually he does know it. This is his final campaign against anybody, because the ghost of Samuel told him that he was going to die, that this was his final battle. So he actually knows that this is his final battle. He also knows that his kids are going to die too. So this is a pretty serious and scary moment for him, but he still does go into battle. The interesting thing is that David is supposed to be fighting with the Philistines. And as we read, he got sent home because most of the Philistines didn't trust him. His king, the king of Achish, he trusted him. He trusted him, but King Achish, but the other kings of the Philistines didn't, and they sent him home. And he went on a separate battle against the Amalekites. What seems interesting about that story is it gives him a perfect alibi for not being anywhere in the vicinity of where Saul was when he died. It seems a very convenient alibi, too convenient of an alibi. Okay, so let me speak a little bit louder into the mic. Now you should hear it a little bit better. I can hear myself through the speakers, which
We
means
can hear
somebody
you
should.
fine, Rabbi.
What?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, good. So the Philistine armies are arrayed against us. That's where we are. It's a very dangerous scene. We're at the beginning of chapter 31, and this is the battle. And again, David is nowhere near this battle, according to the Bible. He was with the Philistine armies, but he's not with them now. Nowhere near them. So here we go. Rosemary, if you start chapter 31 for us.
The Philistines attacked Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines, and many fell on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines pursued Saul and his sons, and the Philistines struck down Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua, sons of Saul. The battle raged around Saul, and some of the archers hit him, and he was severely wounded by the archers. Saul said to his arms bearer, "Draw your sword and run me through, so that the uncircumcised may not run me through and make sport of me." But his arms bearer, in his great awe, refused, whereupon Saul grasped the sword and fell upon it.
Okay, so now I have to do a couple things. No. Well, I could, but then I would not be able to add this very special point right here, which is that Saul just committed suicide. And according to the Bible, the reason that Saul committed suicide was because he asked his arms bearer to kill him and his arms bearer refused, which means he had to do it himself.
Suicide?
Yeah,
Threw himself on his sword.
he threw himself on his sword and he died. So this is an example of suicide in the Bible. When people say, do we have suicides in the Bible? Well, it seems that Samson kind of committed suicide, right? Saul commits suicide here. And there's another story of a suicide later on in the next book of Samuel of another guy who commits suicide.
But wasn't there, I mean, it was a battle line, right?
Yeah.
So there's no chance that he just got pushed into it, that he.
He kind of just fell on his sword.
I mean, he did, he did. Yeah, that's. He did.
So the Bible says he fell upon his sword. That's what the Bible says. Yes, you're right. Maybe he did. But the Bible says he fell on a sword. And then look what happens next.
When his arms bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died with him. Thus Saul and his 3 sons and his arms bearer, well as all his men, died together on that day.
Oh, that's true.
Wait a second. We just lost you guys.
Is the volume all the way down on the laptop? Or is that-
No, well, we don't have a choice. Keep trying to do me a favor. Keep trying to call Mike. Okay. Rosemary.
Yes, can you hear me? I hear you.
Okay.
I'm getting-
We lost. This is not good. Okay. We're going to figure out a way to do it.
I didn't realize Rosemary loved mercy. She's very good at
Now we don't hear you, Rabbi.
Mike is coming to the
Going to come and rescue.
Mike is coming to the rescue. Yeah, he's davening. John is davening. Has he become Orthodox? He's davening. All right, we're fixing it right now, guys.
First one stone.
He's davening. He's davening. He became Orthodox.
I
Thought he
prefer
became
my-
Orthodox.
shut off his camera.
We thought you were davening. All right, so we're getting this thing worked out right now. And here is Michael. Yes, there are 2 suicides in the very quick in a very quick moment. Oh, guess what? It wasn't Michael. It was the Nathans. False alarm. False alarm, guys. So
I'm sure to make
it was the Nathans.
Hi, Ronnie. Hi, Phyllis.
Hello, Ronnie and Phyllis.
Ronnie and Phyllis, everyone's saying hi to him. All right. So we had another suicide. Ooh. Come, guys, sit down, sit down. The people who are virtual here are getting frustrated.
We're virtually here, they're actually.
Yes, so the Nathan's just walked in.
So what did we miss?
Well, everyone just said hi. Everyone just said hi to you. All right, so we just read that Saul committed suicide and that his arms bearer also committed suicide. And in addition to Saul and his arms bearer, his 3 sons also died. So all of these people die together. Rosemary, why don't you continue?
From where? When his arms bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died with him. Thus Saul and his 3 sons and his arm bearer, as well as all his men, died together on that day. And when the men of Israel on the other side of the valley and on the other side of the Jordan saw that the men of Israel had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned the towns and fled. The Philistines then came and occupied them.
So it was a very bad day. Very bad day for Israel. It was, they lost their king, they lost their princes, their generals, and the Philistines drove them out of their towns, which means that the cities that were the Israelite cities in the nearby area became Philistine cities. It's reminiscent of things that we're seeing on television right now.
They killed themselves by falling on their swords.
Yeah.
Is that where the expression comes from?
It wasn't that what maybe wasn't the first time, but it's the first time we've seen it.
Well, I know that.
But to fall on your sword, I mean, people have been doing it for thousands of years. Is this the earliest suicide? I'm not sure. I don't know if we have, Sumerian or Akkadian documents of people committing suicide in battle, but this seems like the only thing he could do. All right.
The next day, the Philistines came to strip the slain, and they found Saul and his 3 sons lying on Mount Gilboa. They cut off his head and stripped him of his armor, and they sent them throughout the land of the Philistines to spread the news in the temples of their idols and among the people. They placed his armor in the temple of Ashtaroth, and they impaled his body on the wall of Beth Shan.
So Saul was correct in not wanting to be captured by the Philistines, because as you can see, they did exactly what they said they were going to do. And they disrespected his body. And they literally impaled him out in the open for people to see at Beth Shan. Yes.
Somewhere in the Torah where you can take your life when you're not supposed to take your life.
Okay, so, well, first, let me just finish this up because Cheryl got to the question of suicide. So, first of all, Beth Shan is a place that we go to when we go to Israel. It's a amazing Roman city that is very well preserved. Was called Scythopolis during the Roman period, the Greco-Roman period. It was a pagan city. There were Jews that lived there, but it was still considered by the time of the rabbis a city that Jewish people really don't live in. Interestingly, this is the city that became also in the Bible synonymous with the this horrible scene of Saul being put on display, his dead body being put on display. So Bet Shan became synonymous with that in the Bible, and kind of with paganism, idolatry, bad things. And I think Bet Shan is actually, I think Scythopolis is actually mentioned in the Christian Bible as well. Because during that period, the Greco-Roman period, it was not a city where Jewish people lived. Even though Judea was a Jewish country, had a Jewish king, there were cities that were not considered Jewish cities.
So would this be the area that you showed us on the map where they were fighting the battles then?
This is pretty far north. I will show you on the map exactly where it is. Today, it's an area that actually is an Israeli development area. It was not considered a great place to live, Bet Shan. It was kind of like, I don't want to say anything because it's going to offend somebody, but it was kind of like living up north of Bakersfield. It was not. It is in Israel. It is not in a disputed territory but I will show you where it is. This is where Beth Shan is. So. Plutarch was the first to mention it. Well, this is before Plutarch.
Soldiers did that.
Okay, but this is before Plutarch, but yes, the Romans gave it to, the Romans did it much more frequently than we did. But so here's the Jordan River. There's the mighty Jordan River, the border between Israel and Jordan. And this is the road that we go on, the 90, which is in contested or disputed territory. When you drive from Jerusalem to the Dead Sea over here, this is the Jericho Road. There's Jericho. You drive down here, you turn left, and you go north. And by the way, we're not talking about that many miles. We're talking about from Beth Shan to Jericho down here is about 25 miles, 30 miles.
I'm sorry, Mark, I got distracted. Can you just real quickly-
Yeah. So here's the road that goes north-south along the Jordan River. Until you get right here, you're in the West Bank. So the 90, well, no, it's not closed. It's just, this is a major road. But when you get to the 90 turn off right here, you're in Bet Shan. So this area is northern Israel. This is considered like the lower Galilee. There's Beit Alpha. We're talking about during the Christian period, this area right here, that's the Sea of Galilee right here. So there's the Sea of Galilee. There's Beth Shan. You see, that's not Masada, the Masada that's down there, the big Masada. But here's Nazareth and here's Beth Shan. So the distance from Beth Shan to Nazareth would be about 10 miles walking along there. This is Gilboa. This is where he was killed on Mount Gilboa. This is where his body was taken. But I want you to see how far away the Philistine territory is. The Philistines are all the way down here in Ashdod, Ashkelon, and Gaza. So this is their territory. This is where they beat King Saul, all the way up in the north. So if they could do that, if the Philistines beat him here, that means everything in here is under Philistine control. This is Israel.
Mark, we talked about why that happened, but I don't remember. There was a reason why they traveled way over there and didn't do it over here.
Oh, because right here, they're saying, we control your whole country. Because this is the far north of Israel. This is the northern part of Israel. And if you come here, this is everything. This is the Jezreel Valley. This is the valley that we talk about that connects the Jordan to the coast. This is the Jezreel Valley. This is where all the big battles would take place, right here in this area. That's a little bit of kind of a little bit of a, you can see, well, you can see why Israel, why this area is so important. And again, what it was during the time of the Romans, during the time of Jesus, which is again, Nazareth to Bet Shan. For those who went on our Israel trip, by the way, and I don't want to make everybody who didn't go on our Israel trip feel bad, but if you've been on our Israel trips, I should say, we always go to Beth Shan, by the way. And a lot of groups don't go to Beth Shan. I find it to be a very interesting place. And I'm going to show you a picture for those of you who went to Beth Shan, who've been to Israel with us. I'm going to remind you where Beth Shan is, because most of you remember it from one special thing there, which is one of the Roman constructions. Oh, it's not showing by my pictures. I'm going to show you. No, it's not a McDonald's. I'm going to show you where.
Since when? Was there one when I was there?
I'm going to show you guys who've been to Israel with us. Where Bet Shan is.
Is it a kosher McDonald's or a regular McDonald's?
Don't remember, but I mean, I was shocked. So different the second time I went there.
These are the bathrooms, the Roman
Oh,
toilets.
yeah.
So those of you who've been on our trip,
Yeah.
this is Bet Shan.
Some of those are mine.
There's my Shira. Oh, that's
Yeah.
so that's that was the toilets.
Toilets.
Yeah.
The Beit Shan toilets.
These are the Roman toilets that are so well preserved that you can actually see the stalls that people sat on. Of course, they sat in groups. It was a group activity. So that's our Bet Shan. That's a reminiscent, but there's a beautiful Roman amphitheater there. There's a beautiful forum. And you can see the place literally where Saul, you can look up onto the mountain and envision Saul's body being hung there. And the city was always associated with that. So now back to Cheryl's point about suicide, when suicide is acceptable. The Bible doesn't really weigh in on suicide. We know in Jewish tradition that it's not something that we're supposed to consider as a way of escaping our problems, I guess you could say, as dealing with the mental health issues that we deal with. But that being said, the Bible has a few examples of suicide, and in none of those examples is there a statement that what the person did by killing themselves was wrong. Now, I don't want to say that the Bible encourages suicide. It doesn't. But it also doesn't say, for example, as you just read, that Saul did anything wrong by doing what he did. You just read it.
But he was gonna die one way or the other.
Fine.
He was dying.
Okay, so is that a euthanasia? Maybe it was euthanasia. Maybe he did it to himself. But the point is that the arms bearer wasn't necessarily going to die. Now you could make the argument if he gets captured, he doesn't want to be tortured and die. So, he avoids that. But nowhere does it say what he did was wrong or what he did was, evil in the sight of God, which we have the phrase, we see it all the time. What the guy did was evil in the sight of God. We actually saw it last week in our
Cemetery?
Well, it's an interesting question because Saul isn't originally buried in a Jewish cemetery, but where he's buried actually becomes pretty critical in a second. So for years, people who committed suicide were not supposed to be buried in the main part of a Jewish cemetery. It was an area where people who had left the community could be buried.
Left the community as in converted or moved away?
No, people who had stopped following Judaism.
I've been in my office at class.
What? Oh, sorry. What? Oh, I thought somebody said something.
So would that have been Saul? Or Saul, because he did leave, right? He went with the Philistines. Right?
No, David.
David went.
Saul didn't.
Okay.
I mean, Saul seems to worship idols sometimes, or has idols around the house. He also consulted spirits, though he did, in a purge of necromancy, got rid of all the witches. He found the last witch that he could. We don't know how religiously observant Saul was. Interestingly, in the Midrash, Saul's considered to be a pretty religious guy. Actually, very religious, so much so that he seems to be diligent in his observance of mitzvot and very modest in his appearance and in the way he teaches his family to behave.
So his death ultimately was as a result of him not following the rule or the guidance.
Yeah, he didn't listen to God.
Right.
God told him to destroy the Amalekites, and he didn't do it. Though there seemed to be more Amalekites around because David just went to war against some Amalekites. So it doesn't seem like King Agag was the last Amalekite.
So when David leaves the group and Philistines goes back over there, all this stuff happens.
Yes.
David goes on, he does become king, but is he forgiven for all the things he did?
We'll get to that. You're way early on. You're way early on that. But King Saul at this point, I just to back to Cheryl's question, there doesn't seem to be a condemnation of what he did. Again, you can make the argument he was going to die. He didn't want to be disrespected and tortured, and he didn't want that. He didn't want to go through that. So was this another option?
So, and it comes up in Masada. I mean, that's the big question. Masada.
So Masada was not part of Jewish literature for a long, long time.
I had to deal with it. Once it became known.
Yeah, but Masada didn't really become known until the 20th century. Yeah, because it was in Josephus, and we didn't read Josephus. We didn't read Josephus, though. Most Jews didn't come into contact with Josephus until the 19th century. So we came into contact with Josephus as we became more integrated into the world. And when we started studying history in college, that's when we started, because Jews didn't read Josephus. Then we discovered Masada, and then we said, oh yeah, this really did happen. We didn't really believe Josephus at first. I will tell you that the judgment on Josephus and Masada was about 50-50 at best, where most Jewish scholars thought Josephus invented the story. Why did he invent the story? He wanted to make the Jews look heroic and very Roman-like. Why? Because Romans did stuff like that. They fell on their sword and they told stories like that about it's better to die a free man than to be a servant. So people said, that doesn't sound very Jewish. Well, it turned out it was true. We've got very good historical archaeological evidence for the story of Masada. We even found the names of the people on the ostraca that they used to choose lots to kill themselves. And remember, they killed, only one person committed suicide. Everyone else killed somebody. So it was all murder and then one suicide. That was to prevent mass suicide, by the way. That's the weird thing, that they took that so seriously that according to Josephus and according to like what we think archaeologically we can reconstruct, that only one person committed suicide.
That happened in Europe also, right? England, with the Roman thing and the Jews.
Well, those weren't Romans. Those were British. Those were British people. That was King Edward. That was a legitimate king of England that was responsible for that. Well, look, the mass suicide at York was another example of people choosing to kill themselves before they were going to be murdered. But there's a difference. So again, all that's at play, Cheryl. Being killed, being enslaved, is it okay to commit suicide? Well, here's the weird thing. There are stories from the Talmud that basically say the same thing that the Masada story said, which was there were stories in the Talmud of mass suicide during the Roman period. Not individual suicides, there were those, but there were also stories of mass suicides. So it wasn't like the Masada story should have been, like I read it and I'm like, how did you not know that would happen? The Talmud says it happened. The Talmud says it happened. There's a story, a very famous story in the Talmud of a shipload of young boys being sent back from Rome to be sex slaves from Judea, young Jewish boys, and they threw themselves, according to the Talmud, into the water and died rather than go back to Rome, being sent to Rome. So that story is in the Talmud. So the story of Masada wasn't, I don't think, like, why would you say, oh, that doesn't sound right? It didn't sound right because it sounded too Roman, because the words that Josephus put in Eleazar ben Yair's mouth sounded very Roman. Now, seeing as Josephus wasn't there at the time, yeah, he wrote a Roman speech. Yeah, he wrote a Roman screenplay, but everybody would have like said, oh, okay, well, we know that happened. And here's the weird thing. According to Josephus, there was another mass suicide at Magdala in the north in Tiberias, where he says 5,000 people committed suicide. So 900 people, less than 1,000 people committed suicide at Masada. In Magdala, 5,000 people committed suicide.
Is it the same archaeological proof or not?
No, there's not the same proof, but you get to the point where you're like, Josephus, like, why are you going to doubt him on that when you're, he was almost exactly on the, well, we don't know exactly how many people died at Masada, but he was like at 960, and like he literally had it down to the people. Now, he also lived in the north, so he would have known more about what went on in the north anyways, because that's where he was a general. But there's no reason to believe that any of this stuff was not true. But by the Roman period, the rabbis wanted to discourage people from committing suicide. So they said it's more important for you to live than for you to be martyred. But up until that time, these stories of Samson and Saul, and these are stories, the arms bearer, these are stories of people that wanted to commit suicide, they wanted to be martyred rather than to be murdered.
I always
enslaved.
just assumed it was that it took the Romans so long to take Masada, and that he wanted to make the story as the Jews as heroic as he could. And one of the things that Romans did that was heroic was fall on their sword. They saw it as something very heroic.
Yeah, but the Jews seem to want to discourage it because the value of life, the boundary of what is considered to be legitimately enough to commit suicide for, the rabbis really got into an argument about it. And I think to some extent, it wasn't just the Romans, it was Christians. Because Christians really, really valued martyrdom.
Yeah.
And then that put the Jews into a weird situation where they were like, well, maybe that's too much. Right? So if anything, it might have been the Romans, but it also could have been the Christians. So it's hard to know, because around that period, you have mass amounts of Christians being martyred, and
That's not suicide. Christian martyrdom is not suicide.
Yes and no. Some of it is extremely close to, did you really have to get caught? And so when people wanted to be martyred because that was, I mean, look, you can make the argument, if you're a Roman slave, the decision between being martyred as a Christian and living the rest of your life as a slave, go either way. I'm not laughing at it, but you can understand it. I mean, I kind of get it. Like, yeah, why not? I don't need to live like a slave. I'll go out as a martyr. Look, it became an issue. It clearly became an issue because the Talmud goes on lengths about it. And people have written a lot of books lately on Jewish martyrdom during this period. And when it came back was during the Crusades and during the Inquisition, when people said, well, what do we do now? And the persecutors and the people that were actually creating this situation were Christian. So that was a tough one. And I think because the Christians were actually the ones causing the martyrdom, it was actually, they went back to starting to accept it a little bit more. Because if the Christians were doing it to us, then of course we can be martyred. It was a weird thing. But during the Crusades and during the Inquisition, there was a move back to, I wouldn't say accepting or celebrating martyrdom, but definitely not dissuading people from martyrdom. So it's weird. There's a weird cultural thing that went on when it came to that. Look, there was a real question of whether, if somebody tells you you have to convert to Judaism, the rabbis had a disagreement on it. There was a disagreement on whether, all the way up to Maimonides, which are talking about the Middle Ages, whether you could convert, or whether you should convert, or whether you allow yourself to be martyred. There's a big discussion about it. Can you pretend to be Christian, which is what a lot of the Spanish did, right? Which is what Maimonides did. He was forced to convert to Islam, and his family went when he was a little kid, and his family went back to Judaism. So these are big issues as far as Jews in the Middle Ages. But during the Roman period, there was a real, like, some rabbis were, no, you get killed, you don't do anything, you don't even eat pork, you don't. And then there were other ones who said, no, you have to live. You can't allow yourself to be killed in that moment. God doesn't want you to die. So there's a real movement away from suicide, and then there was and martyrdom, and then there's this return to it to some extent during the Middle Ages, late Middle Ages, and kind of like it became an issue again.
Isn't that sort of like the 100th monkey? I mean, the tipping point. If it's done enough, then it just slips over into whatever it is.
Yeah.
Martyrdom.
Yeah. Yeah. And when we have stories like Saul's, clearly there's other issues at stake here. He's going to die. He's going to be tortured. This isn't just suicide, right? This is martyrdom to some extent, or there's other things at stake here, not just a matter of mental health, or not feeling that there's any other way out, or all the other things that go on. I will tell you today, to answer Cheryl's question finally, today almost every community does not prevent Jews who've committed suicide from being buried. Even the most religious, observant, halakhically following communities, for the most part, there are exceptions, understand that mental illness is an illness, and if it leads someone to commit suicide, it's because they were ill. And so the illness manifested into suicide.
So they accept it as a real illness, but do they treat it as a real illness?
And that didn't apply back in the day.
I mean, currently, obviously.
There have been recent cases, I'm talking about in the last year, where people have committed suicide, and I've seen the Orthodox community allow them full burial rights.
That brings up the question, is everyone who commits suicide mentally ill?
Well, Saul's not.
Right. Well,
Saul's not. Saul knows exactly what he's doing. And
He is, but not because he.
well, yeah, that's true.
right.
That's true. There was some mental illness. There was a history of mental illness, bouts, depression, manic depression. But this is a lucid moment that he clearly is making here, which is maybe ironic, right? In that he had bouts of depression and murderous rage. But in this moment, he seems pretty lucid, pretty rational, right? This is the right decision to make, probably in this moment. All of us can understand it. The moment that his arms bearer throws himself down on that's a pretty wild scene. It's not over, folks.
Well, but the arms bearer, and I must have read this somewhere, didn't want to be captured and thought that he committed regicide.
Oh, it's weirder than that. Watch what happens when we actually find out about the news, we found out how he died. So here's what happens. Here's what happens with Saul's body. Okay, Rosemary.
When the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard about it, what the Philistines had done to Saul, all their stalwart men set out and marched all night. They removed the bodies of Saul and his sons from the wall at Shan and came to Jabesh and burned them there. Then he took the bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh and they fasted for 7 days.
Okay.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
You talk first.
No. That's the end of the book, folks.
Okay,
That's the way the first book ends.
that's crazy. So my question is that there's big opinions about getting cremated. Now, they just cremated these guys and buried the bones, or buried whatever was left. Right, in Judaism, isn't there a big thing about?
Yeah.
So,
So why would you think that this would be okay in this situation?
well, their bodies were mutilated.
That's your answer.
Okay.
This is not the normal kind of situation. This is a very weird situation where like that answer, I mean, any answer that's given is, this is a very unusual situation. And in order to essentially purify the body or to give it any respect, it was better for it to be
Well,
burned.
it's not that unusual. I mean, I've seen pictures of, and I don't know the name of the society that picks up pieces of Jews after
Yeah.
a bombing.
Yeah.
Are those people then buried or are they cremated?
Oh, no, they're buried.
Okay.
They're buried. So the pieces of body that are cleaned up by these amazing, I'm like, how do you even do this? The Hatzalah people that the Hatzalah and Zaka crews that come into,
Burial society?
yeah. And so they come in and they clean up after a terrorist bombing, and they take every piece and they make sure it's buried. So they have to make sure that it's buried. So they're making sure that it doesn't just get cleaned up or washed away.
So why are they not, what, in his story, why not put him in the shroud and do the typical?
Oh, because assumedly there's not enough of his body to do that with. Like it's been cut up, it's been desecrated, whatever they've done to it. It's a horrible thing. So again, we wouldn't do that today. We wouldn't take these pieces and then burn them and use the whatever,
Cleans up the messes from the highway when there's a car crash.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And so what happens is they don't want any of the body being washed away or thrown out in the trash. That's it. So in this case, at least they could bury the bones.
You don't think about.
They can bury the bones, right? And so by burying the bones, this allowed them to at least bury him in some way that was respectful then with the bones. And it says that they fasted for 7. I mean, that's a fast, 7-day fast that they fasted, the people of Jabesh. Now, what's interesting about this is that this shows us this connection. Going back, I told you about the people of Jabesh Gilead. These are the first people that get around Saul and support him. This connection he has to Jabesh Gilead. It goes back here and then comes back here, which is that they're the ones who did this amazing thing, which is that they went in. Rosemary just read it. They sent in a group of soldiers, stalwart men, which is a weird phrase. These are a commando team. They sent in a commando team to rescue the guy's body.
That would still be considered.
I mean, the sons too. It's not one guy, but
That would have still been considered a Philistine area.
yeah, they went into this area that was Philistine, went in at night and risked their lives to bring his body back. That's what the Bible just said happened. They marched all night, came and took the body and brought it back to Jabesh.
I'm saying little prayers for Ukraine.
Yeah. This concept of rescuing a body, Israelis have still done this, by the way, in the last 60, 70 years. Israel has done everything they could to get bodies back, including giving back or turning over prisoners for bodies. Yeah, in some cases, and again, people sometimes get mad at the Israeli government for doing it, but they will turn over, people who've been convicted of terrorist attacks in order to get the bodies back of Israelis.
like that. The United States does things like that.
Yeah.
It's not unusual.
Well, it's unusual. It is unusual because some countries don't care. Some countries don't care. They're exactly. So this actually came out that when Ukraine said to Russia, you've got a lot of dead bodies here, they sent them a bunch of bags. That's what their response was. They didn't say, give us the bodies. They they sent them over a bunch of bags. And that's what the Ukrainians now have said. They said, look at what they're saying that to the Russians. Look at what your country does to you. They don't care. So this literally happened in the last 4 weeks. The Russians said, we don't care. You do whatever you want with the bodies. So it does tell you about the value of the country if they don't care for the people that fell defending their country. Or in this case, I mean, how do you even justify, right? But that's their response. And again, that's what Ukraine wanted to do, is highlight the level of brutality of the Russians and the lack of humanity they have for their own people, their own citizens. So this is a very powerful story in the Bible, the story of Saul's body being rescued, Saul and his sons being rescued, being brought back, and that people risk their lives doing this. And there are, again, cases in modern Israel of commando teams that have gone in to try to get bodies back. Israel has been trying for 50 years now, almost, to get Eli Cohen's body back from Syria. For 50 years, they've been trying to get his body. Yeah.
It's because this idea that the body is Beth Elohim, made in the image of God. That you have to treat it with respect. You can't just throw it in a bag.
And there is that feeling that if you've left somebody behind, that you failed.
Yeah.
That even if you've won, you haven't really won. But it's a reminder. It's a reminder that that battle, that war is terrible as hell. And if you don't value the people who fought for you, then how can you be ever expected to not be ridiculously brutal in battle and ever really want to have peace? So you can judge people by the way they fight and the way that they treat their enemies, and in some cases their own soldiers.
So you mentioned it to me. No, it's not. That's 68. 58 or 62.
All right. It'll be nice and toasty. So if you no, I'm just sitting bad. Anyways, so this is the story of Beth Sean. So now we're going to skip to the not skip. We're going to continue with a break that really seems kind of like, well, obviously you don't usually have a book that has 13 a chapter that has 13 verses. Let's now come to the second Samuel. And all right, now we read what happens when Saul is dead. So Rosemary.
After the death of Saul, David had already returned from defeating the Amalekites. David stayed in Ziklag. On the third day, a man came from Saul's camp with his clothes rent and earth on his head. And as he approached David, he flung himself to the ground and bowed low. David said to him, "Where are you coming from?" He answered, "I have just escaped from the camp of Israel." "What happened?" asked David. "Tell me." And he told him how the troops had fled the battlefield, and that, moreover, many of the troops had fallen and died. Also, that Saul and his son Jonathan were dead. How do you know, David asked the young man who brought him the news, that Saul and his son Jonathan are dead? The young man who brought him the news answered, I happened to be at Mount Gilboa, and I saw Saul leaning on his spear and the chariots and horsemen closing in on him. He looked around and saw me, and he called to me. When I responded, at your service, he asked me, who are you? And I told him that I was an Amalekite. Then he said to me, stand over me and finish me off, for I am in agony and am barely alive. So I stood over him and finished him off, for I knew that he would never rise from where he was lying. Then I took the crown from his head and the armlet from his arm, and I have brought them here to my Lord.
So finish him off means he didn't die at that time.
Well, well, it seems as though there's two stories here. There seems to be two different accounts of what happens with Saul in his last moments. Because here now we have an Amalekite who comes and says, well, this is what I saw. Which, by the way, here's another Amalekite who doesn't seem to have been killed. The Amalekites, once again, provide an interesting foil and an interesting characters in this story. So here, the guy says, I killed him. I did the final coup de grace, right? The final moment. So Saul, according to this, didn't really die. This kind of still leads to the myth of Saul, that Saul couldn't be killed. Like, he can't die. He can't kill himself. That's the composite story. The composite story, the two versions are, well, one, Saul dies by his own hand, and the other one, because it seemed like Saul was dead before. He was very much dead, but I guess he was only mostly dead. So the problem here is that the Amalekite kills him, which, by the way, just again adds to the myth, because like he can't be killed. I mean, he like literally, finally, like after all this, he finally gets killed. He's like Achilles, right? But his Achilles is not an Achilles tendon. It's an Amalekite. Only an Amalekite can kill Saul. Now, it doesn't say that. But the implication is that Saul can't kill Saul. Saul can't get killed by the Philistines. Like, they should have been able to kill him. He's got all these, according to what we read, he had a bunch of arrows stuck in him, but that didn't kill him. He couldn't kill himself. What finally kills him is an Amalekite. And this is part of the myth of the Benjaminites, or Saul and his family, and the Amalekites. He didn't kill the Amalekites like he was supposed to. And what they do is they come back and kill him.
Do the rabbis try to reconcile this story?
Oh yeah, they love this. This narrative that the Amalekites and the family of Saul are waged in this epic battle, as I mentioned to you, continues into the story of Esther. Because Haman is an Agagite. He's a descendant of the Amalekites. And Mordecai and Esther are descendants of Benjamin. So this is part of the myth. The Benjaminites, or the family of Saul, versus the Amalekites throughout history. They're literally like Highlander. That's a terrible analogy, by the way.
Terrible analogy.
There you go. What? Yeah. But this eternal battle between Amalek and the Jews, especially represented by the tribe of Benjamin, especially represented by Saul's family, is a great myth, right? Because you could have it like happening even today. Like if you were a really good fantasy writer, that's going on somewhere, I don't know, somewhere right now. Those descendants are still fighting, are still battling each other, right? Zelensky versus Putin. No, I mean, it literally is that kind of weird kind of eternal battle between people who are,
It's classic. I mean, it's a classic story. Isn't it? It's classic.
Yeah.
It's a classic story.
And so they love this. So what do you think is going to happen to the bearer of such important news? The guy who tells David that Saul's dead. You can guess.
David took hold of his clothes and rent them, and so did all the men with him. They lamented and wept, and they fasted until evening for Saul and his son Jonathan, and for the soldiers of the Lord and the house of Israel, who had fallen by the sword. David said to the young man who had brought him the news, "Where are you from?" He replied, "I am the son of a resident alien, an Amalekite." "How did you dare," David said to him, "to lift your hand and kill the Lord's anointed?" Thereupon David called one of the attendants and said to him, "Come over and strike him." He struck him down and he died. And David said to him, "Your blood be on your own head. Your own mouth testified against you when you said, 'I put the Lord's anointed to death.'"
So David didn't kill him, but he had somebody kill him for him right in front of him. And his answer is, you can't kill the Lord's anointed. You can't kill the Messiah. You can't kill the king that God chose. Of course, he's the next king that God chose. So if you can kill him, if you can kill Saul, you can kill him. So he's got to send a message. So this is definitely, yeah, the messenger. You don't want to be the messenger, right? This is 100% the example that we think about when we say, don't kill the messenger, don't shoot the messenger. This is what happens. So this guy maybe thought he was going to get a hero's welcome. Look, the Amalekite, he says he's a resident alien, which means he lives among the Israelites. He's a non-Israelite. We've read about other guys who are Doeg the Edomite. We've read about other people already who are not Israelites who live amongst the Israelites. He doesn't seem like there's any problem with him in the sense that he, up until this time, he's been living a life amongst the Israelites. And what does he think? I mean, he knows that Saul's been trying to kill David for years. For years, this guy's been trying to kill you. I mean, did this guy think that he was going to be rewarded? Yeah. He brings Saul's crown to him and says, "Look, here, you can be king now." So did this guy think he was about to be rewarded? And what did David do? Right in front of everybody, David sent a message. He's just gotten started. Let's read. Yes, I know. All right, here's the song.
And David had some discharge over Saul and his son Jonathan. He ordered the Judites to be taught the song of the bow. It is recorded in the book of Yashar. Your glory, O Israel, lies slain on your heights. How have the mighty fallen? Tell it, God. Do not proclaim it in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistine rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised exult. The hills of Gilboa, let there be no dew or rain on you, or bountiful fields, for there the shield of warriors lay rejected, the shield of Saul polished with oil no more. From the blood of slain, from the fat of warriors, the bow of Jonathan never turned back, the sword of Saul never withdrew empty. Saul, Jonathan, beloved and cherished, never parted in life or in death. They were swifter than eagles. are stronger than lions. Daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you in crimson and finery, who decked your robes with jewels of gold. How had mighty fallen in the thick of battle. Jonathan sprang on your heights. I grieve for you. My brother Jonathan, you were most dear to me. Your love was wonderful to me, more than the love of women. How have the mighty fallen for weapons of war? Perish.
Wow. Sorry.
So who wrote this?
Who wrote this?
What did he do? Is it-
Who wrote it?
Well, man, yeah, I'm assuming
David
it's
is singing the dirge.
According to the Bible, he ordered the Judites, the tribe of Judah, to be proficient in the song of the bow.
Yeah, but it's David in turn, he told him the dirge. So he's teaching it to the Judites. Who are the Judites?
His tribe. It's B'nai Yehudah. These are his tribe. But did he write it or did
Well, that's what
somebody else? Now, it doesn't say he wrote this dirge. It says he intoned it, which is essentially that he sang it, right? It's called the Song of the Bow. It's also written in another part of the literature, which we don't have. The book of Yashar, which is lost to us. It's referred to elsewhere in the Bible as a book that was a book that the Bible was written from. So there was a book that we don't have, the Sefer Yashar, that the Bible talks about, and we don't have it. We have parts of it. We have references to it. But there's something really cool about this song or this poem, this dirge. I just gave it away. I actually just told you. It is also found right here. Here it is, my friends. It is known as Psalm 18. For the leader of David, the servant of the Lord, who addressed the words of this song to the Lord after the Lord had saved him from the hands of his enemies and from the clutches of Saul, right? Well, 1 second. This is all about Saul going after him. 1 second. Hold a second. No, don't. It's not that I know all this. No. I will tell you that we have a. Oh wait, so maybe I was on the wrong psalm. Sorry, it's not Psalm 18. Wait, what psalm is it, guys? I made a mistake. See, there you talked about how brilliant I am.
There goes that. Oh man, age is starting to show up.
I know. Hold it a second.
Rabbi Google.
Yeah, I know. That's not funny. Psalm 18 is the other psalm that we already read from. Hold it a second. No, somebody tell me quick. Tell me which. No. Tell me which psalm is the psalm of 2 Samuel 1.
Song of the Bow.
Sorry.
Samuel 2.
No. Oh, I am seriously getting old. Stop it. Somebody look it up. I don't want to waste any more time. Hold it a second.
I'm looking for the song though.
Use the screen.
2 Samuel 1:17 through 27. I'm not finding the song.
I don't know. We're going to find it, guys. But this psalm, this prayer, this dirge, you can see that he clearly is upset with the death of his mentor and the original king. So we're going to look for it where it is in Psalms. We're going to keep going though. All right, keep going. Rosemary.
Sometime afterward, David inquired of the Lord, shall I go up to one of the towns of Judah? The Lord answered, yes. David further asked, which one shall I go up to? And the Lord replied, to Hebron. So David went up there, along with his two wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, wife of Nabal the Carmelite. David also took the men who were with him, each with his family, and they settled in the towns around Hebron. The men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. David was told about the men of Jabesh Gilead who buried Saul. So David sent messengers to the men of Jabesh Gilead and said to them, may you be blessed of the Lord because you performed this act of faithfulness to your Lord Saul and buried him. May the Lord in turn show you true faithfulness, and I too will reward you generously because you performed this act. Now, take courage, you brave men, for your Lord Saul is dead, and the house of Judah have already anointed me king over them.
So you can see, no, but it's close. That's maybe what I was thinking of, but that's not the part. Thank you, there, Marsha. So what happens here with Jabesh Gilead, there was a line from Psalm 18, but that wasn't what I was looking for. So here's the interesting thing that happens in this scene is that David says to the people of Jabesh Gilead who rescued Saul's body, what you did was a very brave thing. And I want to reward you for this act that you did for Saul. But notice what he says to the people. He says to them, I am king, right? And essentially, take courage and be brave men, for your Lord Saul is dead, and the house of Judah have already anointed me king over them, is a little way of saying, I think you need to get in line and make me your king too. Why did he do it with the people of Jabesh Gilead? Because these people in particular had a very special relationship with Saul, and they're in the north. And if David can get the support of Saul's most loyal followers, then he gets to strengthen his claim of being king. But what you see here is that David is not really accepted yet as king. Otherwise, he wouldn't have done this. He wouldn't have made this play for Saul's, Saul's real group. So what David is doing right now is trying to appeal to the base, to Saul's base. And he does it, by in particular going to the people of Jabesh Gilead. Again, this is way far north. This is like in the Golan Heights area. These are people that are on the other side of the Jordan River. These are people that when Saul became king, one of the first things he did was go to Jabesh Gilead and fight for them against the Ammonites. These are people that are on the fringes geographically of Israel. But David does the same thing that Saul does, which is make sure let's get these people on our side. And now David does the same thing with the same people. Not a group that you think would be a main constituency. These are not people in the heartland of Israel. This isn't Ephraim and Manasseh. These aren't the heartland, base tribe. This is the north. This is the. Yeah.
This kind of a precedent today, or today, trying to establish a constituency.
Yeah. Well, this is almost going after the base of those people, not the independents that are in the middle. This is going after the people who are way out there that are going to be the people that if I can get those people, then I can get everyone in between. And that's really what it kind of looks like, what he did here with this. Any other comments or questions about what just happened? But what we do know is that David doesn't have everything in line yet. Saul's dead, but David's not king. That's the important thing I want you to see. Saul is dead. Jonathan is dead, but David's still not king. He's got to get to be king. And what does he do? He appeals to these people, Saul's base, but he also has to figure out where he's going to go to make himself king.
Saul
And where
has
does he
one
go?
more
He
son,
goes to
right?
Hebron.
Saul has one more son.
Went to
though.
Hebron, which is not in the far north, but it's not not by Jerusalem. I mean, it's by Jerusalem, but it's south of Jerusalem. He doesn't go right up into Jerusalem. So here's what he says. All right, I mean, here's what he does next. Go ahead, Rosemary.
Son of Ner.
Whoa. Rosemary, start over with but Abner or Abner.
I'm still getting feedback. But Abner, son of Ner, Saul's army commander, had taken Ishbosheth, son of Saul, and brought him across to Mahanaim, and made him king over Gilead, the Asherites, Jezreel, Ephraim, and Benjamin, over all Israel. Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, was 40 years old when he became king of Israel, and he reigned 2 years. But the house of Judah supported David. The length of time that David reigned in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months.
That means there were two kings at the same time. A king that you've never heard of, Ishbosheth. Ishbosheth is not his name. His name was not Ishbosheth. Let's take a look. His name was not a man of shame. That seems to be a politically motivated nickname. Boshet means shame or embarrassment. Now, we know that his name elsewhere in the Bible is Ishbaal, which isn't a really good name because it's got the name of Baal in it. So calling him Ishbosheth is a play on the fact that he had the name Baal in his name. And that, again, calling him a man of shame instead of a man of Baal does two things. It makes fun of him, and it also makes a statement of Baal, right? So there were other people that had Baal in their names. Jerubbaal, who's also known as Gideon, is named Jerubbaal. Having Baal in your name seems to have been something that some Israelites had, much as there are people who have
Doesn't necessarily
Greek, Roman, or Christian names today who are Jewish and nobody says anything about it.
Like all the masters.
No, Matthew's a Jewish name.
Oh, yeah.
Matthew is Matityahu. Peter is not it's not a super common Jewish name, but
My kids qualify. They all have Jewish.
yeah, well, I don't. I'm named after Mars, the god of war. So I have a perfectly good Roman name. I don't have a really good Jewish name. But if you were a Jewish Christopher, I guess you'd also have a name that was not such a Jewish name.
Jewish Christopher. My
Yeah, there are Jewish people named don't seem to have very Jewish names. So the fact that Ishbaal is named Ishbaal by itself doesn't necessarily mean that Saul wasn't a good Israelite. It does seem like he did worship other gods, or he had statues, at least he had idols. So it might have gone with, who knows? But the fact is that Baal doesn't seem to have been an issue for him in naming his kids. We're going to see there's another young man who also has the name Baal in his name that's part of Saul's family.
So why?
Baal also means God, by the way. I mean, it means Lord. We use the word in Hebrew that's the word for husband. When we say Baal Habayit, it means the master or the Lord of the house. Baal Abusta comes from the word Baal Habayit, means the Baal Habayit. We use the word Baal all the time. We just don't think about it because the name has become part of Hebrew. Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
In terms of academic biblical scholarship, when was the stuff written? Is it written after after the first temple was destroyed?
No, it's not written after. It's definitely not written after the first temple is destroyed. So
Is it written at a time when there was a northern and southern kingdom?
probably.
Because that would be significant. I mean, in terms of dynamics and what's going on here.
Well, whoever wrote this wrote it with the admission that David was not king over everybody right away.
So does that fall into what he just said then about the two different areas or the two different kings in two different places?
Yeah. There's a northern king and a southern king. Saul's son is Ishbosheth is the king of the north. The Bible just said so. And it says he was the king over Gilead, over the Asherites, over Jezreel, over Ephraim, and over Benjamin, which means that when David appealed to the people of Yabesh Gilead to say, hey, I'm king, it doesn't seem like they recognized it. When he went to Saul's body rescued people, the people of Jabesh Gilead, or Jabesh in the Gilead, they don't seem to have said, oh yeah, David, we think you're king. We appreciate your support. They didn't seem to get behind him. So whatever David did, it wasn't appealing to the north yet.
It's possible. I'm just speculating. It's possible. Look, if historical events are widely known, and you're going to write propagandistic history of that period, you have to be true to the facts that everybody believes in, right? And
I don't know about that.
evokes legitimacy for the house of David as opposed to the house of Saul. And that seems to be going on here.
Yeah, who's trying that right now?
Places were geographically separated. Well, they're not geographically separated by a lot. The tribe of Benjamin from Hebron is 10 miles. 15. Look, it's enough that David isn't able to they don't come over right away. But it also tells us that David was king while Saul, he considered his time to some extent as king before Saul was dead.
And maybe it's not very fine too with the years and the months, right?
Oh yeah.
6, 7 years or 6 months.
Yeah, they're saying that there was an overlap when David was king and no one recognized him as king except for the tribe of Judah. That's what it says.
And God.
Yeah.
I was just
Well,
gonna say that. But isn't that that's the whole story?
but the point is that David got anointed years ago.
So we will find out how this other God does.
How this other king.
Yeah, king, I meant.
Yeah. Well, the king has the support of Abner. So Abner didn't die. Abner, who's Saul's commander, didn't die in battle. Right? Abner is Saul's main general. And he didn't die.
When they all killed each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Abner survives. And Abner makes sure that Ishbosheth is the king. It says he brought him across to Mahanaim, to this other city, and he made him king in that city. Made him king.
Was he the son that was
Yeah.
brought?
Say that?
Was he the son that was dropped?
No, we're getting to that. That's
away?
not a son. That's a grandson, but we're getting to that.
Oh, okay, all right, I just remembered, okay.
So let's read what happens to Ishbosheth and Abner, the rival monarchy.
Once Abner, son of Ner, and the soldiers of Ishbosheth, son of Saul, marched out from Mahanaim to Gibeon, and Joab, son of Zeruiah, and the soldiers of David also came out. They confronted one another at the pool of Gibeon. One's group sat on one side of the pool, and the other on the other side of the pool. Abner said to Joab, "Let the young men come forward." Yes. They came forward and were counted, 12 for Benjamin and Ishbosheth, son of Saul, and 12 of David's soldiers. Each one grasped his opponent's head and thrust his dagger into his opponent's side. Thus fell together. That place, which is in Gibeon, was called Helkat Hazurim.
Yeah, they weren't playing. They were engaging in single combat. So 12 guys on each side decided to pair off in single combat so that they would fight. And well, it's not single combat, it's a dozen combat, but 12 people fighting against each other instead of the whole army going against each other. It's the David and Goliath thing, except now we're having 12 guys. Except what happened here is that all 12 killed each other. That's pretty wild. You can understand one guy killing one guy. That's could happen. But 12 guys all killing each other? That's crazy. So it's almost like a miracle. They all killed each other. Nobody is left standing. It's a gunfight and everybody dies. Yeah, it's a gunfight and everybody dies. Everybody dies.
So the last guy was injured before he died.
I don't know. They're all dead. According to this, everybody stabbed the other guy and they all died. And the place was known as the Field of Flints or the Field of Blades. That's a pretty gruesome place. Let's see, Clint Eastwood in that. Field of Flints. Yeah, it's terrible. It's a terrible scene. All these Israelites killed each other in battle. Well, they were going to kill each other in battle anyways, but 12 guys killed each other in battle, assumedly to stop the bigger battle, to decide who gets to leave the victor. So what happens is they do it and no one leaves the victor.
But the two kings were not involved in the battles.
No, 12 other guys were. Right? So here's what happens when that doesn't get solved.
A fierce battle ensued that day, and Abner and the men of Israel were routed by David's soldiers. The three sons of Zeruiah were there: Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. Asahel was and Asahel.
I don't know why we're getting that feedback.
Swerving neither right nor left in his pursuit of Abner. Abner looked back and shouted, "Is that you, Asahel?" "Yes, it is," he called back. Abner said to him, "Turn to the right or to the left and seize one of our boys and strip off his tunic." But Asahel would not leave off. Abner again begged Asahel, "Stop pursuing me, or I'll have to strike you down. How will I look your brother Joab in the face?" When he refused to desist, Abner struck him in the belly with a backward thrust of his spear, and the spear protruded from his back. He fell there and died on the spot, and all who came to the place where Asahel fell and died halted. But Joab and Abishai continued to pursue Abner, and the sun was setting as they reached the hill of Ammah, which faces Giah on the road to the wilderness of Gibeon.
So this battle that takes place in Gibeon, which is in the central part of Israel, not far from Jerusalem, is a battle where they originally tried to have it settled with single combat. That didn't work. There's a battle that ends up happening, and the generals, the leaders of the battle, end up fighting each other, which is very rare. It almost seems a miraculous thing too, that these guys end up fighting each other. Yoav is David's general and Abner was Saul's general. And now these guys are left fighting each other, which again is not the way things normally happen. Normally there's combatants and the generals are sitting back in the back, not involved. These guys are very involved. Abner, as we have already learned, is Saul's main guy and is very well respected, is very smart, is a calculated and methodical guy who seems to be also pretty strong. We just saw what he did to Yoav's brother Asahel. He goes back and while he's running, spears the guy behind him because the guy won't get off of him. And he says, I don't want to kill you. I don't want to kill you. I'll have to kill you, but I don't want to kill you. And how will I ever deal with your brother Yoav if I have to kill you? So he says to him, don't make me kill you. I will kill you. Don't make me kill you. And he does. He kills him. And that just freaks everybody out because Asahel was a great soldier too. So what you're seeing here is a civil war with people who respect each other. I don't know, to use the modern things that we've seen. This is the battle. This is the Avengers Civil War, where you've got superheroes. And again, the way the rabbis see it in the Midrash, these are guys who really are superheroes. Like they're literally stronger and faster than everybody. According to this, again, Asahel is super fast, but Abner is super strong. And so you have these two like superheroes that go at it. And what happens is that Abner kills him. And he just says, I don't want to kill you, which is pretty, it's very dramatic. It's very, it's again, almost like a tragedy. I don't want to deal with, I don't want to kill you. I don't want to have to deal with your brother. But he does. And the two other brothers, Yoav and Avishai, are left now with their dead brother.
So the size that they describe David as is not the size, but these people still have a lot of strength and power, right? I mean, David was,
Well, we don't know how big David was. We actually, last time we saw him, fighting, we don't know that he's big, right? But these guys are well known for their strength, for their speed, for their valor. And now one of them's dead.
So is this the whole story of history repeats? Because
all I can tell you right here, this is going to be a lot like you killed my brother and now I'm going to kill you, right? This is a vendetta. This is mafia type stuff. These are people getting whacked because they were forced to kill someone. They didn't want to kill him, but they had to kill him. And now they're going to get, this is the,
still see this today.
we don't see this a lot, you and I, because we don't live in cultures with honor killings and thankfully with people who have to kill someone and then have to deal with the consequences of killing the person, even if they didn't want to.
But it does remind me of the Civil War.
This is really mafia, you're really going to see how mafia this is.
But it does remind me of the Civil War. Do you know?
What?
It does remind me of the Civil War where they all went to the same call and then ended up, brother fighting brother.
Yeah, that's true too. These are people that studied at West Point together. Yeah, like Grant and
knew each other.
And Lee were not at the same time, but exactly the same time. Yeah. Had some similar friends. Could have been on the same side in different circumstances. What?
It's not quite a vendetta.
It will be. Well, not yet. You'll see the vendetta. The vendetta is about to happen.
No, I meant the Civil War.
Oh, no. No, this is vendetta.
Right.
This stuff is, but but there is this respect for the enemy, which we did have during the Civil War. And this is a civil war. This is a civil war. These are Jews killing other, these are Israelites killing.
Earlier about, you know, ego and, defending and propaganda and, right? You're going to defend your tribe, right?
Yes, but what's interesting about this is that Abner tries to, Abner is the one who, what we know about him, he's made a rival king, which is not a good thing. He's causing problems for David. He doesn't want to kill Asahel. He says, I don't want to kill you, but he does. And we're going to see Abner, what happens with Abner.
Explains why very few people are named Abner.
So that's an interesting analogy.
So let's see what happens to Abner.
The Benjamin warming was, and they took up a position on the top of the hill. Abner then called the sword devoured forever. You know how bitterly it's going to end. How long will you delay ordering your troops to stop the pursuit of their kinsmen? And Joab replied, as God lives, if you hadn't spoken, the troops would have given up the pursuit of their kinsmen only the next morning. Joab sounded the horn, and all the troops halted. They ceased their pursuit of Israel and stopped the fighting. Abner and his men marched through the Arabah all that night, and after crossing the Jordan, they marched through all of Bitron until they came to Mahanaim.
So they stopped fighting. They stopped killing each other. Yoav gives up pursuit. They stop. And Abner goes back to Mahanaim, goes back to Ishbosheth, assumedly. They go back to their camp. They go back to their place.
After Joab gave up the pursuit, he assembled all the troops and found 19 of David's soldiers missing. Besides, David's soldiers, on the other hand, defeated the Benjaminites and the men under Abner and killed 360 men. They bore Asahel and buried him in his father's tomb in Bethlehem. Then Joab and his men marched all night. Day broke upon them in Hebron.
So as we can see, it's a pretty big victory for David and his forces. They killed a lot of Benjaminites, killed 360 people that were fighting. They lost 19, but they did lose, they lost 20. They lost 19 besides Asahel. But Asahel's death is going to be a big issue. It's going to be a big issue. It's going to be a big issue for Joab. He's not going to forget. So it's a pretty good victory for David and his forces, but it's not over. And this is what we're going to finish with right now.
The war between the house of Saul and the house of David was long, but David kept growing stronger while the house of Saul grew weaker. Sons were Amnon by Ahinoam of Jezreel. His second was Kileah by Abigail, wife of Nabal the Carmelite. The third was Absalom, son of Maacah, daughter of King Talmai of Geshur. The fourth was Adoniah, son of Haggith. The fifth was Shephatiah, son of Abital. And the sixth was Itrion, David's wife Eglah.
So David has six sons. He also had a daughter born at this time too, but she's not mentioned. Yep, lots of women and lots of sons. His firstborn son was Amnon, was his wife Ahinoam, who we read about before. He also has a son with Abigail, that amazing woman that came to him, and still is referred to as the wife of Nabal. She's still known as the wife of Nabal.
That's like Jackie Kennedy on
It's
that.
crazy.
Is that to stress remember, Samuel says, really, you want a king? He's gonna take your girls, he's gonna take your boys.
Well, you know, it's
Just
interesting.
see,
It's interesting about this though, because if you look at the women that he takes, they're not, it's not a normal kind of situation where he just took a bunch of women. He actually, each one of those wives that he took in a different circumstance. And they're not like the normal kinds of situations where you just go, well, you know, he just took a bunch of wives. In reality, you know, one of them or two of them he was married to before he was even like really, I mean, he was king. I mean, he was anointed, but he really wasn't king. But he was married to Ahinoam and Abigail like right away, or not right away, but we read about it. His wife, Michal, his first wife, he never had a kid with, or I'm not jumping the gun, but he didn't have a kid with her. That's Saul's daughter. It's his first wife. The other women, like we don't know about Maacah. That was the daughter of a Canaanite king. King Talmai of Geshur is a Canaanite. It's not an Israelite. And that's pretty significant because that son, Absalom, becomes one of his favorites. And really, it was his favorite. It's the one he wanted to be king. And Absalom, of course, has a sister, a beautiful sister named Tamar, that we just read about when we flipped up and looked at the story on Wednesday, the story of the other Tamar in the Bible. Absalom and Tamar are brother and sister, and their mother was not an Israelite. So yes, to get to Judith's point, well, look at all the women he takes. They're not exactly, it's not like he went nuts. That's really Solomon. The knock on what kings are going to do is exactly what Solomon does. This seems more, I don't want to say realistic, but it does seem like, I mean, he definitely was married to a few women, but it wasn't out of control. By the standpoint of like what kings did, what he did is not out of control.
It's more like.
I'm not making excuses for him. Believe me, there's a lot of stuff David does that's going to be really bad. In this, he seems to have been somewhat up to this point in control of his passions. Not the case with Bathsheba. So we do know that he does some stuff that isn't ethical when it comes to women. But so far, not really. So far, what he's done is all like within the realm of like what a king of that period would have done. It's not what he's done when it comes to women and kids is very, very reasonable, actually. By the standards of many pro athletes in America, what he's done is very reasonable. Yeah, he's not. I mean, this is not what necessarily held out as what people should do, as we're going to see. This stuff doesn't work out well for his sons, but this isn't a bad thing. I mean, this is definitely in the realm of like normal stuff. So these are his kids. And now we read about what happens with the Civil War. We're going to finish with this today.
During the war between the house of Saul and the house of David, Abner supported the house of Saul. Now, Saul had a concubine named Rizpah, daughter of Aiah, and Ishbosheth said to Abner, "Why have you lain with my father's concubine?"
Oh, so if you thought that, some people forget this story, that David is the one who actually has weird stuff happen within his family and when it comes to women, it seems that Saul did too. Yeah, as a concubine, which again doesn't seem to be necessarily that out of the ordinary. But what is out of the ordinary is that Abner has decided to take her to be his, which for Ishbosheth is a problem, because you're taking my father's wives, which is essentially saying like, you think you're at my father's level. Now, when I talk about how gangster this is, you can imagine what Abner's response is going to be to the guy that he's made king. When again, he says to the guy, why have you taken my father's concubine?
Abner was very upset by what Ishbosheth had said, and he replied, am I a dog's head for Judah? Here I have been loyally serving the house of your father Saul and his kinfolk and friends, and I have not betrayed you into the hands of David. Yet this day you reproach me over a woman. May God do thus and more to Abner if I do not do for David as the Lord swore to him, to transfer the kingship from the house of Saul and to establish the throne of David over Israel and Judah from Dan to Beersheba.
Whoa. So what causes the final break? What causes essentially David to become king is Ishbosheth being a dope. Because what he did is he challenged Abner, who was the real power behind the throne. And so when Abner just got confronted about Rizpah over a woman, he says, that's it. That's it. You're done. He literally says to the guy, to Ishbosheth, you're done. I'm going to make David king now. It's what it says. He said to him. He said to him, really? This is, you're going to challenge me? This is amazing. This is an amazing moment in the Bible because it literally thousands of lives are saved because Abner just told Ishbosheth it's over.
Abner immediately sent messages to David saying,
No. Read the line before.
Ishbosheth could say nothing more in reply to Abner because he was afraid of him. Abner immediately sent messages to David saying, to whom shall the land belong? Say further, make a pact with me and I will help you and bring all Israel over to your side. He replied, good, I will make a pact with you, but I make one demand upon you. Do not appear before me unless you bring Michal, daughter of Saul, when you come before me.
Wow. And so here is David saying, yeah, okay, I want my wife back. And of course, it's not just his wife. He knows what it means to have Saul's daughter as his princess back by his side, right? Because then he's saying to the rest of Israel, not only am I king, but I have Saul's daughter as my wife. So the throne is united under me. But of course, we know that Michal has already been married off to somebody else. So this critical moment in a civil war, in the civil war for Israel, really comes down to two women, Rizpah and Michal. So is Abner going to turn over Michal? First of all, we already saw what happened. When Abner tells this to Ishbosheth is literally shaken. He can't say anything. So it says that Ishbosheth was scared. So Abner scared the hell out of him. But what's Abner going to do? Because Abner doesn't technically have the authority to do this, to turn Ishbosheth's sister, the princess of Israel, over to King David. This is the whole country is coming down to this moment right here. One of the biggest moments in the history of Israel to this moment.
David also sent messengers to Ishbosheth, son of Saul, to say, give me my wife, Saul, for whom I paid the bride price of 100 Philistine foreskins. So Ishbosheth sent and had her taken away from her husband, Paltiel, son of Laish. Her husband walked with her as far as Bahurim, weeping as he followed her. Then Abner ordered him to turn back, and he went back. Abner had conferred with the elders of Israel, saying, you have wanted David to be king over you all along. Now act. For the Lord has said concerning David, I will deliver my people Israel from the hands of the Philistines and all its other enemies through my servant David. Abner also talked with the Benjaminites. Then Abner went and informed David in Hebron of all the wishes of Israel and of the whole house of Benjamin. When Abner came to David in Hebron, accompanied by 20 men, David made a feast for Abner and the men with him. Abner said to David, now I will go and rally all Israel to your majesty. They will make a pact with you, and you can reign over all that your heart desires. And David dismissed Abner, who went away unharmed. Just then, David's soldiers and Joab returned from a raid, bringing much plunder with them. Abner was no longer with David in Hebron, for he had been dismissed and had gone away unharmed. When Joab and the whole force with him arrived, Joab was told that Abner, son of Ner, had come to the king, had been dismissed by him, and had gone away unharmed. Joab went to the king and said, what have you done? Here Abner came to you. Why did you let him go? Now he's gotten away.
There's no question in my mind that this was written by people who very much knew these people and very much knew what happened. Because this story is not a story of propaganda. This is a story of people literally having a discussion over the basic human emotions of vengeance. How did you let the guy that killed my brother get out of here? He was here and you let him go? That's Joab talking to King David. That's Joab, his general, his cousin, telling him, you let the man who killed my brother into this place and then you let him get out of here? This stuff only happens in the, like, we only hear about it in the mafia. Like we see the movies, but this is what happened just now. This isn't about, I mean, the world, literally their world, the civil war going on in Israel is at hand right here. And these people are arguing over the fact that this guy let the man who killed my brother into the, you let him in and you didn't kill him. That's what Yoav, that's all Yoav's thinking about. They're trying to end the civil war and Yoav wants vengeance. David wants to unite his country. Abner says, I'm done with Ishbosheth. You guy's an idiot. What's happening is the world is falling apart and these people are only thinking about their own stuff. It seems pretty human to me. So here's what happens.
Don't you know that Abner, son of Ner, came only to deceive you, to learn your comings and goings, and to find out all that you are planning? Joab loved David and sent messengers after Abner, and they brought him back to his sister's Torah, but David knew nothing about it. When Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside within the gate to talk to him privately. There, thus, by shedding Asahel, Joab's brother. Afterward, when David heard of it, he said, both I and my kingdom are forever innocent before the Lord of shedding the blood of Abner, son of Ner.
So Yoav stabbed him. Yoav said, come back. We got to finish the discussion. And he stabbed him, killed him in cold blood. And David's response is, it's not on me. I didn't do it. Now, did David not think that this was what Yoav was going to do? Yoav told him what he was going to do. That's why the story actually tells us in the story that David can say whatever he wants. The blood's not on me. But come on. What did he think Yoav was going to do? Yoav said what he was going to do. Says David knew nothing about it. Seems like David knew that. Yeah. he had to know that Abner was going to get him.
Like,
And this is all within that 6-year period.
Yep. Now read what happens.
may the guilt fall upon the head of Joab and all his father's house. May the house of Joab never be without someone suffering from a discharge or eruption, or a male who handles the spindle, or one slain by the sword, or one lacking bread. Now Joab and his brother Abishai had killed Abner because he had killed their brother Asahel during the battle of Gibeah. David then ordered Joab and all the troops with him to rend their clothes, gird on sackcloth, and make lament before Abner. And King David himself walked behind the bier.
So David at Abner's funeral makes Joab and the rest of the family also mourn, come to the funeral, and he gives Abner a state funeral, right? And he tells everybody, you know, you've got to mourn this guy. This guy's a hero. Look at the curse that he lays on Joab, though. Look at that curse. May all have discharge, and may your men all work like women. That's what he says. May they all do only women's work. That's crazy. That's a crazy curse. But what does he do? And again, that you should always be. So David gets himself covered by cursing everybody who's involved in Abner's death. But it does seem really, yeah. So let's just read the last, yeah, you just don't want to end all this, but we have to. So let's just read this.
Bring it down a little bit. I think we missed a line. And so they buried Abner at Hebron. The king wept aloud by Abner's grave, and all the troops wept. And the king intoned this dirge over Abner. Should Abner have died the death of a churl? Your hands were not bound, your feet were not put in fetters, but you fell as one falls before treacherous men. And all the troops continued to weep over him. All the troops came to urge David to eat something while it was still day. But David swore, may God do thus to me and more if I eat bread or anything else before sundown. All the troops took note of it and approved, just as all the troops approved everything else the king did. That day, all the troops and all Israel knew that it was not by the king's will that Abner, son of Ner, was killed. And the king said to his soldiers, you well know that a prince, a great man in Israel, has fallen this day. And today even though anointed king, those men, the sons of Zeruiah, may the Lord requite the wicked for their wickedness.
Yeah, his cousins, the sons of Zeruiah, are too much even for me. They went a little too far. So we are going to pick up the story, but I do want to point out one thing before we go. One of the most powerful scenes in the Bible here, which is again a civil war. Ishbosheth, we didn't get to Ishbosheth yet, but you know it's coming. It's coming in the next line. When Ishbosheth, son of Saul, heard that Abner had died in Hebron, he lost heart and all Israel was alarmed, right? So he knows it's all over once Abner's gone. But look the way it went out. That's not the point. What this all comes down to is vengeance and a couple women and honor. But the most powerful scene, I think, in this story today, one of the most powerful scenes, and one of the most powerful scenes in the whole Bible, is this guy right here, right? This guy right here. I went too far. It's this dude right here. Where'd it go? Oh, I didn't go far. Right here. Paltiel, son of Laish, Michal's husband, who's crying.
But he has no choice.
He has no choice. And Abner tells him, get away, go back. You're done.
Isn't there a whole
You're out.
thing about not sleeping with, like, you can't remarry?
Yeah. Yeah. The Bible says you're not like, well, the Bible doesn't, the rabbis say, but it's based on, again, a man taking back a wife, you know, that he spurned.
Commandments.
But this scene, this guy, Paltiel, right? The guy that we don't, you know, we read his name twice in the Bible. Seems like a totally righteous guy. And what do we see him? The last time we see him in the Bible, or the only time we see him in the Bible, he's crying as his wife is taken away from him.
What does the Midrash say about Paltiel?
He's a righteous guy.
Just that
He's a righteous guy. He's the guy that shouldn't have had to deal with this. But they can't make him too bad because David ordered this.
It's interesting, we only care about the men. We have no insight into her being forced to leave her husband and going elsewhere.
Yep. Well, we don't know whether she ever didn't want to be married to David, right? So we don't know whether she really wanted to be taken. The last time we saw her with David, she seems to like him. She tries to save his life. We don't know if at a certain point, well, we know at a certain point it changed. And we're going to get to that point because it's in 2 Samuel chapter 8.
There's also a book, a novel based on the story of Michal.
Yeah.
And it's
I think it's called Kingmaker.
Kingmaker or something like that. It's by I want to say Israel Abraham is his name, but it's not. Something like that. And it's it gives Michal's story. It's your voice.
Yeah, it's a terrible story of a guy who just wants to be with his wife. You could say to some extent he's he shouldn't have been married to her in the first place. She was married to somebody else. He was taken, whatever. I mean, it's just a tragedy. I mean, it's a tragedy that shouldn't have happened.
He also doesn't want Saul's children or bloodline to go on.
Wait, sorry, hold it. Go.
He doesn't want Saul's bloodline to go on. She could have a baby with this other man. It would be Saul's bloodline.
Yeah, we don't know that she ever had a baby.
Right, but I'm saying that she could have, with that, being with him long enough, she could have possibly in the future had a baby. This way he cut off Saul's bloodline.
If David and Michal had a child, that king would be a little bit of the north and a little bit of the south. He could have been the ultimate monarch. But he was never born.
But I'm saying that the Hall, I guess, what's his name? Her husband, that leaving her with someone, it was possible that she could produce an heir.
Oh yeah.
Right. So
yeah, absolutely.
He
Absolutely.
that too. He really did kill it. David does what's good for David.
Yes. If Michal has a son with Paltiel, then that was another rival to the throne. Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, folks. I apologize for our technical problems this morning. We're gonna fix it right now.
Make sure you have it fixed for tomorrow, Rabbi.
We'll fix it. I have no idea what happened, but thank you for your patience and thank you for being here today as we read a story of real dysfunction. We'll see you later. Take care.